Hello, Ryan Green here. Welcome to my channel, Kinetic Methodology. In our training series here of self improvement, focusing on emotions, this is training video number 5. And in this video training, we're going to look at identifying your emotional triggers. Let's get started.
Identifying your emotional triggers. Identifying what triggers your emotion is the crucial first step to mastering them. You probably don't know at this point where some of your emotions are coming from. If you see another person react in a certain way, but you do not know them well, you will not know what is triggering their emotions. Your emotional triggers are unique. Emotional triggers can result from a lot of different factors that affect people in different ways. You need to understand that your emotional triggers are unique to you. You can trigger an emotion from an experience. For example, an emotional trigger can be an experience, an event, a particular thing, or even another person that causes you to react in a specific way. The way that you react will depend on the type of emotional trigger. There are different types of emotional triggers that you need to be aware of. Anxiety emotional triggers. An emotional trigger that makes you feel anxious will make you feel uneasy, uncomfortable, and will probably make you worried. If you are prone to anxiety triggers, then you can feel fine one minute and then very anxious the next. Something that triggers anxiety can happen over and over again. Sometimes these triggers occur so often that the person suffers from chronic anxiety. For example, if you have a fear of water, then you will be okay most of the time because you are not thinking about this or not near water. But if you see a swimming pool or are near the ocean, then this anxiety trigger can kick in and make you feel terrible. Even people talking about swimming or being in the water could be an anxiety emotional trigger for you. Trauma emotional triggers. If you have been through any kind of traumatic event in your life, then many things could be a trigger for you. A classic example is people that have experienced wars as soldiers and are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. But you do not have to be suffering from PTSD to experience trauma triggers. Maybe something bad happened to you in the past. Anything that reminds you of this can be a trauma trigger. Your dreams can initiate a trauma trigger or a flashback to a past event. A trauma trigger can often occur when you least expect it. Experiencing a trauma trigger can be very difficult for you. The trigger causes you to relive the traumatic event, and your mind and body will make this a very realistic experience for you. You may start to shake or even hyperventilate due to an emotional trauma trigger. Anger emotional triggers. Anger emotional triggers are fairly common. They can often be the result of something that frustrates you. When you experience an anger emotional trigger, you will often feel out of control. There are usually physiological symptoms as well, such as shallow breathing and a racing heart. An anger trigger can cause people to start yelling, resort to violence, and use profanity. If you do not control anger emotions, then you can end up lashing out at the wrong people, such as your loved ones. Anger triggers can be more likely if you drink alcohol or take drugs. It is very important to identify any anger triggers in your life. Other emotional triggers. Several other things can trigger emotions within you other than those discussed above. Your reaction to these triggers depends on your current mental health state and your previous experiences. Examples of these emotional triggers could be not getting enough sleep, the grief of losing someone you love, abuse, relationship issues, pain, surprises, loud noise, being in a crowd, being unfairly treated, feeling that you are not wanted, being ignored by certain people. Someone challenges your beliefs. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. The truth is that many other possible emotional triggers are specific to you. You need to know how to identify them and what you can do about them. Emotions do not always stem from thoughts. A lot of people believe that their emotions are a direct result of their thoughts. This is not always the case, as there is often more involved in triggering emotion within you. The emotions that you experience are not only related to your thoughts or how you focus on your thoughts. Your thoughts can certainly trigger certain emotions, but this will not always be the case. Other things can be a trigger for your emotions, so you need to bear this in mind. It is not correct to think that your emotions are only the result of your thoughts. Let's take a look at some simple but powerful ways to identify your emotional triggers. How does your body react? Before we get into specifics here, you need to know that it is not always easy to identify your emotional triggers. In some cases, it will be hard for you to do, but you must identify your emotional triggers because once you are aware of what is making you respond in extreme ways, you can take action and be in control. Although it can be tough to identify specific emotional triggers, it is a lot easier to assess how you are feeling right now. If you find yourself being overwhelmed by a strong emotion, then you make a careful note of exactly what you are experiencing. Are you feeling sad, angry, or jealous? Do you feel physical changes in your body, such as shallow breathing or your heart racing? Perhaps your muscles are starting to tense up. Are you feeling hot or cold or experiencing tingles? When you notice that your body is reacting to an emotional trigger, what is the first thing that happens? Do you start to feel hot? Does your heart start to race? Do you clench your fists? Keep a mental note of these physical reactions and write them down in a journal. It is always good to keep a journal so you do not forget them. What are you experiencing mentally as well as physically? Bear in mind that an emotional trigger can cause very subtle physical and mental reactions to extreme ones. When you assess the way that you feel, it will be easier for you to identify the emotional trigger event. What thoughts do you experience? When you are triggered emotionally, what thoughts do you experience? Do they have polarized viewpoints? For example, are you thinking that somebody or something is evil, bad, wrong, etc.? Don't try to challenge your thoughts at this stage. Be aware of your thoughts and do not react to them in any way. Afterward, reflect on the story that was going through your mind. What kind of story did you experience that created a strong emotion about a situation or a person? Make sure that you write down your thoughts and stories in your journal for further analysis. Think about what triggered your emotion. Each time that you experience emotion with a physical reaction associated with it, think about what triggered the emotion in the first place. Was it another person or a specific thing that triggered your emotion? You may be surprised at how little it takes to trigger strong emotions within you. Sometimes it can be a single word or an object that does this. It may even be a particular smell or some other thing that triggers your senses, like a sound. There are likely to be other times when someone else's viewpoint or belief will trigger an emotion. It can even be a situation as a whole. Someone with a dominating personality could trigger your emotion, for example. Usually there will be several triggers that can cause you to experience emotions. Bear this in mind and always keep an open mind when you are analyzing every emotional situation. This is why we highly recommend that you write everything down in your journal so that you do not forget anything and to help you to identify any patterns. Retracing your steps after experiencing a strong emotion is an effective way of identifying what triggered it. You need to walk back over everything until you arrive at what caused the emotion to occur. Think about the moment when you started to experience negative feelings. What was happening at that moment? With each emotional situation, try and think about what has caused you to become so upset. A lot of people's emotional triggers are rooted in past traumas and experiences. You may find that what triggered your emotion does not make sense at first. Don't give up. Think about what you were doing before you experienced the emotion, as this could provide important clues. What occurred before the emotional trigger? You may need specific prerequisites to occur before an emotional trigger happens. For example, maybe you had a bad drive into work or just woke up in a bad mood. Perhaps you had been in a crowded place or your children were being difficult. Anything can set the stage for an emotional trigger. Sometimes it will be very difficult for you to identify an emotional trigger, but you must never give up. Keep going, as persistent effort should pay off in the end. You must identify every emotional trigger that you can so that you can take steps to prevent these triggers from occurring again in the future. We accept that it can be disheartening to constantly fail at identifying an emotional trigger, and a lot of people will be discouraged by this. But we know that you want to master your emotions. You wouldn't be taking this training if you didn't. So even if it takes multiple attempts to identify a trigger, then keep repeating the identification process. What were your unmet needs? One of the most common reasons for emotional triggers is that your needs are unmet at some level. We all have our own desires, and if we cannot achieve these, then this can trigger unwanted emotions. Here are some common needs that can result in emotional triggers if they are not met. You are not getting the respect you deserve. You are not getting the attention you want. You do not feel loved. You are not having fun. You do not feel safe. You do not feel liked. You do not feel needed. You are not right about something. You do not feel valued. You feel you are being treated unfairly. You do not feel in control. Are any of these needs being constantly unmet in your life? Do you get upset when you don't feel that some of these needs or all of them are not met? These needs will be different for everyone, of course. Pay special attention to your needs being unmet when you are assessing what caused an emotional trigger. In the next video, we will discuss methods for controlling your emotions.